Welcome back, everyone, to Wednesday Inspirational Book Lounge. I'm your host, Anna Murby. Today's guest is Hubert Carl. Hubert and Diane Carl were married for 45 years. They both were involved with ministering to the deaf before they met. After graduating from Sacramento Bible Institute in the early 1980s, they worked with biblical ministries worldwide for almost 20 years. During that time, they spent 10 years in Los Angeles, living in an apartment complex set up for meeting the needs of the deaf-blind. They went on to minister in a deaf church near Sacramento. Diane battled cancer for 30 years, and the Lord used her sickness to lead many people to himself. She was taken home to be with the Lord on July 13th, 2024. Hubert is also a published writer on marriage counseling. Enjoy this week's installment of 10 Famous Evangelists, read by Hubert Carl.
Ten Famous Evangelists by Basil Miller, published by Zondervan Publishing House, 1947, read by Hubert Carl. Chapter 7, Dwight L. Moody, God's Mighty Soul-Winning Preacher. A success story in the field of Christian achievement is what D. L. Moody, the poor boy who overcame many handicaps and arose to the fame of being one of the world's mightiest evangelists. He stuttered, used incorrect grammar, could not speak well in public, and had little education which he did not glean himself. Yet this boy became one of the finest men of God in the pulpit. It is said that more than 100 million people heard him preach the unchanging gospel of salvation. When measured from the standpoint of human conditions, Dwight was born under the most unfavorable circumstances for achievement. But the heavenly rules of God are not those of man. Moody was born in a blustery night, February 5, 1837, 6 of 9 children. When Dwight was young, his father died. Friends insisted that the mother farm out the children, so dire her poverty and great their needs, to institutions and nearby farmers and families who would care for them, the children working for their keep. But their mother had trusted God too many years to believe that he would not hear a widow's prayer and leave her to the tides of fate. Never was the family circle broken, even though the elder lads hired out to the neighbors that they might help support the family. For a few wintry months, Dwight went to the country school, but early was forced to work for his living, which cut short his education. When he was a small lad of 10 or 12, an older brother took him out for his first job, and as they came to the small town, the brother told Dwight that a man usually met boys at the edge of town and gave them a penny. Upon arriving, they found the old man leaning on a cane, and true to form, he gave Dwight the bright penny, saying, "I am giving you this penny to start you out with, but I want to pray that God will be with you all your life." Placing his hands on the lad's head, the old man asked God's blessing to follow Dwight throughout life and make him to be a man of God's own heart. Years later, Moody, then the famed evangelist, in telling the story said, "I have lost the penny many years since, but the prayers of the old man have followed me until today." Moody paid a tribute of the praise to the old gentleman for what his prayers and the touch of his hands on his head had meant to his life. When 17, Moody went to Boston to work at the shoe store of an uncle. Here he attended the Mount Vernon Congregational Sunday School, where a Mr. Kimball, a Christian businessman, was his teacher. One day, Kimball came to the store and, finding Moody alone in the back of the building, told him about Christ. Kneeling there, Dwight gave his life to God. This changed the lad's entire career. "Before my conversion," Moody said, "I worked towards the cross, but since then I work from the cross. Then I worked to be saved. Now I work because I am saved." At 19, Dwight moved to Chicago, where despite his interest in Sunday school work, he was not allowed to teach a class because he stuttered. Finally, he asked the superintendent whether or not the church would give him a place for a class if he got one. Told that they would, Dwight went out that next week and paid 38 dirty boys of the slums to be his class, giving each $1 for this kindness. When he told the superintendent next Sunday, the man in amazement told him he could have any place in the building for his class. During the following year, he went wild on Sunday school work, as the people said, calling him Crazy Moody. Before the year was over, he had a school of nearly 2,000 of his own in the large North Market Hall. Arising at 6 in the morning, He would sweep the hall clean of cigar ashes, gather up the tobacco remains, throw out the beer bottles, and be ready for the first scholars when they arrived. He continued in this Sunday school work until he was 23, when a decision day arrived. Moody was earning $5,000 a year at the time and had saved a considerable sum towards starting his own business. But God spoke to him about devoting his time wholly to Christian activities. What seemed to be a tangled thread of life in the end proved to be the ropes of providence, drawing him into God's will for his life. During these years, Moody had been active in the YMCA as well as the Sunday school work, and even then was called far and near to address conventions where many were won to Christ. His fame spread rapidly throughout the nation. When his market hall proved to be too little for the scholars in the school, a larger one was demanded, and as a result his followers built him a chapel, from which developed the famous Moody Tabernacle in Chicago. While Dwight was attending a convention in Indianapolis, it was announced one morning that he would lead a 6 o'clock prayer meeting. He asked for someone to volunteer to sing, and from the rear a young man arose and in glorious voice sang, "There is a fountain filled with blood." This proves to be Ira Sankey, and at once Moody asked the singer to become associated with him in gospel evangelism. Throughout a long and wonderful career of evangelism, Moody's preaching was ably matched by Sankey's singing, one being used of God as much as the other. Though never ordained, Moody was destined to become one of the most famous and best-known evangelists of the modern times. He was literally thrust into this work. One summer, while his Chicago tabernacle was being built, he decided to go to London, where he would study the methods of other preachers. At the time, he did not understand why he made the trip, but he felt bound to go. Arriving in London, he attended a convention where the only way by which one could speak was to make a motion. Wanting to deliver a short message, he arose and made a motion, and then proceeded to preach a brief sermon. When the meeting was over, a man asked him to speak in his chapel in the city, which proved to be a dull, lifeless place where glory was not present. As Moody spoke, he felt, as he described it, a wave of glory sweep over the congregation, and in a short time the entire audience was in the inquiry room seeking spiritual aid. A marvelous revival broke out, the source of which, much to Moody's amazement, proved to be an invalid's prayer, who 2 years before had seen a sermon of the evangelist. At once she began praying, "Send Moody to our chapel." This 2 years-long prayer finally brought Moody to the chapel, and 400 were converted. Moody testified, "Until that time I never aimed to become a traveling evangelist, desiring to remain in my Chicago tabernacle. But through this woman's prayer I received my roving commission, and from the invalid's prayer came a traveling ministry which brought 1 million souls into the kingdom." Everywhere he went, the largest auditoriums would not hold the crowds who came to hear him. When Moody began a revival campaign in Philadelphia on November 1st, 1875, thousands from the East came to hear him. So great the spiritual upheaval that President Grant and all his cabinet came from Washington to attend the meeting. In 9 months, 900,000 had passed through the doors of the building. This meeting was followed by one held in the Hippodrome in New York City, where Madison Square Garden now stands. 500 ushers were used to seat the crowds. A choir of 1,200 persons under Sankey's direction furnished the music, and on the first day 25,000 heard Moody speak. In one of his meetings there were more than 600 ministers present, and he urged upon them the necessity of lifting up Christ. Often the crowds became so large he was forced to give tickets of admission. For more than 25 years these meetings continued under the spiritual leadership of this godly man, whose English was poor and whose voice was stammering. The source of this marvelous power came from an experience he received one day while walking down New York City street. The thought came to him, the world has never seen what God can do with a man wholly consecrated to him. Moody, while walking, promised that he would furnish the wholly consecrated man through whom the Spirit might work. Henceforth God anointed his ministry in an unusual manner to the salvation of hundreds of thousands. In 1873 the evangelist purchased land for a school at Northfield, where he might train boys and girls. In 1881, the twin schools opened, where hundreds of poor yet deserving boys and girls have been trained. For many years he conducted Bible Institute for personal workers, and out of these, in the Chicago campaign of 1887, came the Moody Bible Institute. From this institution, since its opening in 1889, thousands of Christian workers have gone around the world. The money for opening the Bible Institute came from a peculiar manner. C.T. Studd had given himself for missionary work in China, and when his wealthy father died, C.T.'s amount of the family fortune was $150,000. Studd, in praying, promised to give the entire sum to Christ's work. In one day, he sent 4 checks for $25,000 to worthy Christian causes, one of which went to D.L. Moody, with which the evangelist started the Bible Institute. C.T.'s investment was indeed a brilliant and God-honoring one. In 1880, Moody organized the summer Bible conferences at Northfield, where preachers as well as laymen gather for Christian instruction, which courses continue today. And through the years, the conference has been addressed by the world's leading Christian workers. In 1883, the evangelist called several hundred young men to the conference grounds for a series of prayer meetings and planning conferences. During an all-night conference, 100 young men consecrated their lives to missionary, among whom was Robert Wilder, who gave the world the student volunteer movement. John R. Mott was also present and signed the covenant, and he organized the World's Christian Student Federation, which binds Christian students the world around in a union. In 1892, the evangelist felt led to visit the Holy Land, where preaching from the Mount of Olives, he brought the gospel to hundreds. Returning home, he was to labor in the Master's vineyard for another 7 years, during which time he held many revivals, greatly honored by God. Once in Chicago, he discovered that he was $20,000 behind in expenses for a series of tent and theater meetings held in conjunction with the World's Fair. With a group of young preachers, he locked himself in a hotel room and began to pray for the money. But by noon the next day there was still $5,000 lacking. Just before the deadline, Fleming H. Revel of New York City wired the needed $5,000. Evangelist E.J. Belgian, present at the prayer meeting, said, "Never once did Moody doubt that the money would come. We all prayed, and God sent the funds." There was no love for money in Moody's heart. He did not desire to gain by his revivals, and what money he received went solely for gospel work. The royalties from his hymn books and the many books he authored amounted to more than $1 million, most of which went to build the Moody Tabernacle or to pay the expenses of one of his schools. In 1899, near the end of the year, the preacher's earthly work was drawing to a close. While holding a campaign in Kansas City, on the night of December 21st, he grew restless. Early the following morning, he was heard to say, "Earth is receding. Heaven is approaching. God is calling, and I must go." The end came quickly, and the century's most popular evangelist was gone home to his heavenly Father. The little boy, an orphan seemingly without opportunity, who gave himself wholly to God, was so flooded with the Holy Spirit that his influence will be felt throughout the ages. The Lord used him to inspire thousands to become ministers, and even today, through the schools he founded, the books he wrote, the ministers he won to Christ, his influence continues. What God did through Moody, he can do through the lad of today, who will wholly consecrate himself to Christ's work.
Thank you for tuning in. Come back next week for another installment of 10 Famous Evangelists, read by Hubert Carl. This is Wednesday Inspirational Book Lounge with Anna Murby.